Hi, I'm Steve Thompson again. This is Criminal Justice Ethics, Chapter 3. We'll get started with the lecture now. So if you can follow along with these, I kind of use the PowerPoints that are posted in Moodle to keep me on focus. You're welcome to follow along. You notice the second slide there, we've got a couple of videos. And I just kind of wanted to talk about those two and to get you to understand the situation that is facing the public and law enforcement involving the use of force. So you can just look at those videos, but you'll see the video will say one thing. The video will show one thing. It's pretty clear you see it, but then when you look at an arrest report associated with that video, I'm finding way too often, even more likely than not, sometimes 90+% of the time, I will get a contested case. So that may skew my bias or statistics a little bit, but I'll get a case where the report says one thing and the video says something else, to the point where I really have to ask, was this the same incident? You got them mixed up. This is the wrong report because the report says something that did not happen in this video, or there were things that were left out, or it was misleading and stuff like that. And again, I'm seeing about 90% of the videos I look at with the arrest report finding not just mistakes, like somebody forgot a little detail and forgot to put it in or something, but I'm talking about out and out lies. It's gotten so bad that I train law enforcement officers. In fact, I'm wearing a police academy shirt right now that the cadets gave me in a prior academy class, number 118. So if you're in 118, hello. I make my cadets in the class repeat after me. And so I'm going to ask you right now, repeat after me, especially if you're a police officer. Thou shalt not write an arrest report where there is video without looking at the arrest report while you're writing a report. I make them repeat this because apparently that's just not happening. It's one thing, before video cameras, we had to remember what happened and then write it down. And people took our words for that. They said, well, the police have no reason to lie. They're people of high moral character and integrity. So we're going to believe the police officer. Well, those days are gone. I would say they're changing, but right now they're actually gone. If it's not on video and you wrote it down and you have no video support evidence of that, nobody believes us anymore. And that's the fault of officers writing a report that says one thing and reality says something else. And I've seen a lot of different excuses come out, like, well, you don't see everything in the video. Well, or you don't perceive or feel what the officer felt in the video, but we do believe our own eyes. And I'll quote a local judge in Calcasieu Parish who an officer was contesting what was on the video, saying, well, you don't see it. And finally, the judge interrupted him and said, we're looking at a 70-inch Samsung TV. We don't see what you're telling us is there, and it's clear as day. Just kind of one of the examples. So I don't understand it. It's writing a false report. It's saying evidence exists when it doesn't. It's saying this happened when it didn't. It's leaving out very important information. So I'm seeing that, and that has caused a lot of people in our society throughout the country to say, well, it's hard to believe a police officer anymore because I've got all these videos saying one thing and the officer writes down something else. So I will tell you again, thou shalt not write a police report where video exists without sitting in front of the video and writing a report too. Because as an expert analyst, which is one of the things that I do, the first thing I do is I read the report, and guess what I do then? I look at the video to see if they're consistent with each other. My dream when I look at a video and a report is to say, oh, okay, well, this officer said it right, did it right, everything matches up, and get a nice little fee for analyzing that case and tell defense attorney, sometimes in criminal cases, that, hey, your client was wrong. He committed a crime. The officer is of high moral character and wrote a good report that was consistent with the video and had probable cause to do everything that he did. So I love those cases. But sadly, most of the cases that I get, I just can't do that with. I have to say, this officer messed this up. This officer lied about this. This officer didn't know the law. And it's sad. And it's really frustrating when I want to support the police and and there's no other way to call it anything other than lies. You look at the video and say, this is what happened on the video, but the officer put something else. So I'll stop beating that horse to death. But let's stop that. If you're going to be a police officer, the first thing that the expert analysts, the lawyers and so forth, and a lot of the lawyers don't even look at it. They don't have time. They pay me to look at them. And the first thing I'm going to do is look at the video, and I'm going to look at the report, and I'm going to see if they're the same and see if what really happened, what you said really happened, actually happened. And my skepticism involving officer's testimony based on so many inconsistencies. It's affected me personally. And so I'm going to ask, that's what we're facing today. And it's not the fault of good officers. It's the fault of lying officers and nothing being done about it, for instance. Like, watch the video of the man getting arrested in the hallway. And then there's on the first slide there, and there was a report that was significantly inconsistent with what happened. But you'll notice I believe that was surveillance footage that the officers didn't know existed. So they could write down whatever they want because there's nobody to say, hey, it didn't happen that way, unless one of the officers come forth and says, oh, that's not what happened. But that's really ambitious, we'll say. We'll talk about the code of silence later. Also, the second video there is of a man named Daniel Shaver was shot in a hallway while crawling and begging for his life. He was lit up with an AR-15 with a dust cover that when you fired the first round, it flips open so it can eject the round. And you can see what it says on the screen there, but he had that laser etched in either his personal weapon or his departmental weapon. But, he shot the guy while he was crawling and begging for his life. He ended up going to trial. You'll see a picture of the officer. He's wearing tactical gear and covered in tattoos. He was found not guilty. It's very hard, and the circumstances around this were horrific. I watched it, and I just will never understand why the officer was not found guilty of murder. And now the officer has received retirement and will live the rest of his life off of government benefits paid for by his service, because I believe part of his retirement was based on, he was terminated but rehired, I think, and part of his retirement is based on a medical issue because him shooting the poor man crawling and begging for his life gave the officer post-traumatic stress disorder. I believe this case recently settled for several $1 million because it was an obvious homicide, but it met civil liability, but the jury found the officer in this case not guilty. He could still face federal charges, but we are still waiting on a decision. And it's been several years, so it's not looking promising that he'll be charged in federal court, even though he's been found not guilty already in state court, but feds can still come after him. So anyway, without the video there, they had their own body cam that recorded that. So anyway, we're going to talk about use of force, and hopefully it won't be too boring for you. We're going to jump to the next slide here. So use of force, you'll get a lot of people who say, hey, use of force is very rare, and it is. And in my career, I had very few uses of force. It was usually much easier and more effective just to talk somebody down. In fact, even when I had people actively resisting, I can specifically remember an elderly gentleman. He was probably 60 plus years old, and I arrested him for DWI. He wrecked a car. It was no big deal, done it hundreds of times, and he decided he was not going to jail. And it was active, pulling away, didn't want me to put him in handcuffs. And when I did get him in handcuffs, he didn't want me to go in the car. But it was to the point where I was going to have to use a significant amount of force to get him in the car. But I had time on my side. He was in handcuffs. I was bigger, stronger, faster, and I could have hurt him very easily. And forcing him into the car in a rush probably would have hurt him. So I called for backup just to get somebody to, we'll say, more delicately get him in the car. And I was able to talk him down. And he realized, hey, your life is not over. You can move on from this. Let's go ahead and just get this process done and take your DWI citation. At that point, we weren't booking people in jail, and let him go. So that was just an avoidance of a use of force versus, I didn't have a lot of them. But you have some officers out there who are looking for the opportunity to use force. In fact, I was involved or present. I didn't directly shoot, but we had a SWAT hit where we went in, and the two troopers in front of me on the SWAT hit, it was a hostage rescue. They ended up shooting the hostage taker as he came from an elevated position and threatened to kill the hostage. And there was another trooper there, and he was disappointed that he wasn't the one to be able to do the shooting, and he vocalized that, and that was kind of concerning for all of us. He had never killed anybody before, but he was really looking for that opportunity. So it was a good decision for him to no longer be on the team after exhibiting that type of behavior. But the incidents are rare, and there are officers out there who are looking at it. Looking for the opportunity to use force. If you are looking for it, you can find it. And you can, take advantage of it, as in, there's a difference between reasonable and necessary force. So the opportunity to use a level of reasonable force that's accepted by the courts will happen a lot. There's been numerous instances where I would have been able to use force or shoot somebody, but I chose not to. I chose to exercise restraint. But if I would have elected to use that, we'll say, deadly force, then I would have been completely covered and started, dropping bodies, we'll say. And I didn't look for that opportunity. I didn't want that opportunity. I was prepared and trained to do so, but I was only willing to do it if I thought it was absolutely necessary. So again, necessary and reasonable are not always the same. So, but they are, the use of force is very rare. So let's keep that in mind. But I think a problem, that people have with police officers using force and not automatically trusting them is if we can't trust a police officer with the small stuff, such as write a report that is based on what actually happened and supported by the video, then how can we trust them with the big stuff? So that's when we get into stuff like when Ferguson, Missouri popped off. In Ferguson, the shooting was deemed justified, and after reviewing, so if you disagree with this, that's fine. But after reviewing hundreds of pages of the Ferguson, Missouri, the shooting of Michael Brown by Officer Darren Wilson, I believe it was, the forensic evidence suggested that it was a constitutionally justified shooting. Did it have to happen? Probably so, to save the officer's own life based on the forensic evidence. But, the people there didn't trust the Ferguson police because of all the other stuff that was happening. We'll talk about that more as we go on through the course. But they didn't trust him with the little stuff, so how they were looking for a reason and they needed something big. Well, they shot somebody that was unarmed, and that was enough to, for them to start rioting and got a lot of change implemented. You can say they went about it the wrong way, but the mayor, the chief, and they got significant attention from all the news organizations. And while a lot of people say rioting is wrong, and I agree, we can settle things peacefully. In this case, rioting actually worked. But anyway, use of force is rare. The United States, you should know that police officers kill more people than I believe any other country by our law enforcement officer. I'm not aware of anybody that, I'd have to check on China and so forth, but we have an extremely high rate, especially as compared to Canada. We kill 300 people a year by police officers shooting someone, and Canada is about 10. So New Zealand and so forth are much lower. The phones with the cameras have really changed our world, the world of the police. There was a time when something happened, it was the word of the police against the word of the other person. And unless there was, we'll say in the case of Rodney King, somebody standing over there with this big shoulder mounted VHS camera with a tape as big as 10 iPhones put together, that the presence of the camera everywhere, surveillance systems everywhere, it's almost impossible to even move in our society without it being recorded. Police are recording themselves. That's sometimes it's not easy to get those videos, but you'll see a lot of people recording the police, and the police say, "Oh, you don't need that, I'm recording." I would tell anybody that that's not a good excuse not to record, because accessing those videos, one, they may not ever give them to you. Two, they may disappear. And three, they can be extremely expensive. Take it from me, I bought several of them. I should not have, I don't believe I should have to buy them, but I requested videos from a local department. It cost me about $300 personally for 4 or 5 videos to analyze a situation that I was looking at. So anyway, they've changed our world to the point where it's the collection of all those videos, along with the collection of reports that are inconsistent with those videos. People are putting less trust into the police. So we just should have been assuming the entire time that you're always being recorded, and just be honest and be professional. But there's been way too many officers get caught not doing that. So here we are in a time that if you choose to be a police officer, a lot of people say it's not a smart choice, or it's a very hard choice, or people don't want to do it because police officers used to be held way up here, and now not so much. And we can blame society, but I truly believe the blame rests upon ourselves. It's the lack of it. It's allowing or officers doing stuff and getting caught on video. And that's why a jury just doesn't believe. If you say, "Oh, he confessed to the crime," oh, where's the video camera? Where's the confession on video? And show that to us, and let's see if it was a real confession, if it really happened. Where's the resistance? Where's the pursuit video? If you don't have it, it's really, really difficult to get a jury or a judge to believe us anymore. And that rests on law enforcement shoulders. Because when you catch somebody lying, when I first became a cop, it was like, you don't lie, you don't lie, you don't lie. And then so many people have been caught lying and nothing happens with it. I don't understand it, but the existence of citizen journalists, has changed our world. There's a lot of YouTube constitutional auditors out there that are making a good living going out and finding cops who don't know what they're doing and violating people's rights. And as a teenager, I had my rights violated. I had no idea that they were being violated, but it happened to me as well. I don't know what the officer would have wrote in his report to justify the things that were done, but it's a lack of knowledge of our job. That's why I take so much pride in when I teach cops how to be police officers and teaching them the constitutional law, because we have a great country that has a balance between your rights and apprehending criminals and in our freedom, and so we have to respect the freedom of our society. Otherwise, it's not the United States of America anymore. So, but discipline from these videos doesn't just come from the department. Now it comes from the society, the news media, which the news media used to be the only source. They had to choose, let's put this on the news, but there might have been some politics at play. Now it's on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok or whatever you guys are using now within 30 seconds or as it's actually happening. So it gets out really quick. That's George Floyd got out really quick. They didn't have to wait for the police to release the video, and that caused nationwide protests and so forth. So here we go. We gotta, as law enforcement officers, have to realize, they're always being recorded, and that should not be the motivation for not lying. They should just tell the truth because it's the right thing to do, but they should really, take it into consideration, which why it confounds me so much that a lot of these officers know they are being recorded, but they write down something that's completely inconsistent with what's on the video, even though they know they're being recorded. So that comes down to a lack of accountability, thinking they can get away with it. And they do. I've seen way too many officers lie in reports, do things that are unethical, caught on camera by their own cameras, and it's covered up or cleared. I'm working on one case right now where the officer choked somebody. The video is extremely disturbing, but literally choked somebody by choking them as they gasped for air and begged them to stop. And the officer said, I wasn't choking him. I was doing pressure underneath and gave an anatomy lesson on how it was not actually choking. But when you put your hand around somebody's throat and squeeze it till they gasp for air, I'm no medical doctor. I'm no expert in anatomy and physiology, but I know damn well that's choking somebody. And he said it wasn't a choke, and the internal investigator said, yeah, it wasn't a choke. So, the officer was cleared on that. So, again, we've got a situation where they're on video themselves, but they're lying about it, and there's no accountability in some departments. So, the use of force that is used, there's a use of force continuum. We call it the pyramid, and of course, at the tip of the pyramid, it's always deadly force. But it starts out at presence. You got a list of them there. I won't go through them, but the more force that's used from just a verbal command, which a command requires a legitimate justification or a constitutional justification, all the way up to the use of deadly force. That it requires a higher level as you go up in the level of force that is used. So I won't go over use of force continuums today. So we'll skip that one. Use of force can usually be avoided by professionalism and courtesy. So I'm finding a phenomenon over the years where, an officer can be justified in the force. And when I say justified, constitutionally justified. If the courts deem the actions of an officer reasonable, not with the 2020 vision of hindsight, it's would a reasonable officer in that situation have acted the same way. And now I may not consider myself a reasonable officer as far as, if you've got higher levels of training, more proficient with firearms, whatever, but would a reasonable officer think, if somebody pulls a gun out from behind their back and points it at you, would would a reasonable officer shoot somebody? And then the officer shoots that person, and it turns out that it was a BB gun. Well, maybe somebody who's somehow got some magical cognitive ability to slow things down, and they bring it out and are able to look at the side of the weapon and see that it's a plastic or it's got an orange tip on it, and they're able to identify that without being in fear for their life and choosing not to shoot. That's not necessarily a reasonable officer. There might be some officers out there who wouldn't fire the weapon under those circumstances. Now, that could be because they're just that good or that perceptive, but it also could be they're just not willing to take a human life, which is a whole nother issue. But sorry, I got off track there. When the police act with courtesy, we're finding that kind of supports the level of force that might follow that. So let's take, for instance, the shooting of, God, what was his name? Baton Rouge shooter. Anyway, it was a guy out in front of Alton Sterling. He was out in front of a convenience store selling like knockoff CDs, the crime of the century, right? He gets has some type of altercation with somebody, but somebody calls 911 and describes Mr. Sterling. They say he's a black male wearing this and this and this, and that he presented a weapon, as in he committed the crime of an aggravated assault, which in the state of Louisiana, if you put somebody in fear of being shot with a gun, that is a felony. So the officers are responding to a felony. It's involving a gun. It's a dangerous felony. So they approached the gentleman, and now I'm sure they wrote the report to say something to this effect. I approached, I gave him verbal commands, he didn't comply, I went hands-on, we went down, and he tried to access a weapon, so I shot him. And that's pretty much what happened if you just, limit it to those words that I just used. But Mr. Sterling apparently did have a weapon. He was the person reported, so the officers had reasonable suspicion to approach him and detain him, put him in handcuffs, pat him down for weapons, get a witness statement, determine if there's probable cause to believe that an aggravated assault occurred. And also, Mr. Sterling was a convicted felon, so he was not allowed to possess a weapon. So that's an automatic 10 years right there. So Mr. Sterling did not comply with verbal commands. And so I'm saying this in a way that might appear in an arrest report. And they went hands-on with Mr. Sterling to try to get him into handcuffs. He did resist. He refused to put his hands behind his back. They took him to the ground. He did, according to the video and the evidence at the scene, attempt to retrieve a weapon from his pocket while he was kind of underneath the car. Now, was that retrieval to get the weapon out and maybe throw it under the car to get it away so he doesn't go to prison for a very, very long time? It's very possible, but would a reasonable officer know that at the time? And the answer is absolutely not. The officer was in reasonable fear for his life and the lives of the people around there. So the officer, once he attempted to access the weapon, called it out and ended up shooting Mr. Sterling until he was deceased. So I do use of force reviews and expert analysis. I believe that the shooting was constitutionally justified. The FBI, the DOJ, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the State Attorney General, the state police, everybody that investigated came to the exact same conclusion that it was a constitutionally justified shooting. So what was confusing about that case, though, and the phenomenon that I'm seeing is the officers were terminated. I was like, why are you terminating cops who defended themselves? And the video was not out at the time. So finally, you get to see the written report which says, oh, he did all these things and the evidence supports it. But then you see the video. And you can Google the video. It was the shooting of Alton Sterling, the raw dash cam video. But the officers showed up and started barking these dehumanizing commands at Mr. Sterling, cursing him out, threatening to kill him, pulled his gun out, put it to his head, threatened to shoot him in the head. And I've used profanity in prior videos, but I'm not going to repeat what he said, but it was disgusting and dehumanizing. Now, that doesn't change the fact that Mr. Sterling attempted to access a weapon and either to try to shoot the officers or get rid of it or whatever, but it doesn't change the fact that the shooting was constitutionally justified. Now, I'm not saying morally justified, but when a jury, and the jury did not even make it to a jury, when somebody looks at that video, they're going to see that dehumanizing treatment, and they see that as escalation. Our society now expects us to, and we should be doing this all along, expects us to de-escalate situations. And these officers escalated. Now, would they have had to shoot Mr. Sterling if they would have walked up and said, "Sir, we got a call that you might have a weapon on you. This is for our safety. I need you to put your hands on the car. Do it now." If he refused, "Sir, if you don't put the hands on the car, we're going to take you down. We're going to take you into custody. We're going to do whatever we have to do. I might even tase you, but you better do it now. This is a serious situation." Calm, but no dehumanizing treatment. And then go hands on. And then they shoot him. If they would have done that, I think there would have been zero civil liability and the officers would have kept their jobs. But that's not what they did. They spoke to this man like he was a dog. Now, and the outcome very likely could have been exactly the same. But because of the cursing and the disrespectful treatment, they paid Mr. Sterling's family millions of dollars, millions. So I tell police now, "Hey, you cuss somebody out, how much is it worth?" And like, "Oh, it's worth nothing. I didn't hit him." No, it could be very potentially be worth millions, because if your disrespectful treatment, your fighting words escalates the situation into somebody getting hurt, they're going to look at it as, why didn't you just approach the situation as a professional? A professional knows their job and conducts it courteously. You can be firm. You can have a command presence. And I'm not going to say you cannot use profanity, because sometimes, but these officers basically started with profanity, and I'm seeing way too much of that. We definitely need to stop that, because it escalates the situation. So the point is that research even shows courteous treatment is likely to de-escalate a situation and reduce the likelihood of having to use force. So even if the force is constitutionally justified, juries, judges, attorneys are looking at that and going, "Yeah, it might have been justified. He did try to pull out a gun," but maybe if they would have just been some level of professional, and I don't think it's unreasonable ask for professionalism from our police. We ask for it for the person working the fast food, working in a fast food business. We want to give them our money. We want to be treated politely, and we want to get our service done professionally, and we should expect, and rightfully so, the same thing from our police officers. So the point is, we got to stop escalating the situation, because if we don't, even if you are constitutionally justified, the department, which means the taxpayers, us, is going to have to pay for it. A couple of court cases that you should be aware of. There was a time prior to 1985 and under Tennessee v. Garner, that was I call it the flea and felon case. There was a 14 or 16-year-old kid stole a woman's purse inside a house. If you enter a home to steal something, it's a burglary, and it is definitely a felony. This was Tennessee, I believe Memphis. And anyway, the kid runs out with the stolen purse. I don't know how much money in it, not much. And the officer gives the command to stop. Kid doesn't stop. The officer levels his sights, puts a round in the back of his head, and kills him. I hope I'm not mixing up the details of that case. But anyway, shoots the kid because he was a fleeing felon. The kid posed no threat to anyone. There was no threat that he was going to escape and go kill a bunch of people. He was just stealing a purse and committing a serious felony, but not one that put the public or someone's life in danger. So that's when they put a stop to shooting fleeing felons. There was a time when they could do that. So he has to pose some level of threat. And then following that, the Graham v. Connor case, that's where all force has to be reasonable, and that's where that reasonable. It's not necessarily about what the officer should have done at the time, is what would a reasonable officer. Because if you got an officer who's petrified of everything, and I've seen it, that lock up, you pull somebody over and they step out of the car without being commanded to, and the officer panics and shoots them. Okay, well, that's not what a reasonable officer would do. That officer did it and might have thought it was reasonable, but it doesn't matter. It's what would a reasonable officer do. So those are just two important cases that have kind of shaped how use of force is interpreted and applied under civil liability. And most of this is civil liability, not criminal liability. The prosecution of police for excessive force is extremely rare, and we'll talk more about it, but there's a lot of factors behind that, such as district attorneys working closely with police, the politics involved of charging a cop. And I think one of the most significant factors is, when a police officer is charged, it is very difficult to get a conviction. Extremely difficult and extremely rare. So, if you're not going to get a conviction, there's not a whole lot of point in taking it to trial. Another case that I'm kind of well, I teach this a lot is in reference to police chases, use of force, like back to the flee and felon case. If you have somebody fleeing in a vehicle, they can be shot if that person poses significant threat of injury or significant bodily injury or death to the public. So if somebody's driving extremely recklessly, an officer would be it would be acceptable for an officer to use deadly force. That would be either with a pit maneuver, flipping the car over, shooting at the car, whatever it takes. I've seen some cases. There's one going on, I think in maybe it was Arkansas. I can't remember what state, but a lady was not pulling over fast enough, so the trooper ended up pitting her at a slow speed. You know, she's doing like 40 miles an hour. Anyway, flipped her over. She was pregnant and caused some pretty good injuries. And she was just trying to, there wasn't a safe place to pull over right there. So she was, you know, and that obviously was an excessive level of force. But we'll see how that case plays out. Another way to for officers to be civilly liable, and I talk a lot about civil liability, is for the failure to train, failure to supervise. So when someone is, we'll say, one that I deal with a lot is DWI arrest. And the DWI system, you have to be proficient and know how to administer a standardized field sobriety test. And not all officers know how to do that properly. In fact, I'd say the majority of them don't. And if the person is not, we'll say, falling down drunk, anybody can see somebody falling down drunk, but if the person's not, just obviously intoxicated, you really have to rely on the standardized field sobriety test. And I've seen a lot of people, innocent people, under no impairment whatsoever, get arrested for DWI, and that's a little scary. In fact, I assisted in a lawsuit not long ago, and I will put this out there. It was a Louisiana Third Circuit Court of Appeals case. The gentleman had no alcohol in his system, no drugs in his system. The trooper was extremely deficient in the standardized field sobriety test, did not know what he was doing. A pathetic example for a trooper to the way he did his investigation. And he arrested this gentleman who was completely innocent. He was just old and suffered from disability, so he couldn't stand on one foot or whatever. I analyzed like 10 DWI arrest reports, some before and some after this particular event, and he wasn't the only person that got arrested that was innocent by this particular trooper. And there was a lawsuit filed, and so an innocent person goes to jail for absolutely no reason. Anyway, that failure to train was kind of the focus of the lawsuit. And my point to tell you this is that lawsuit was actually dismissed under qualified immunity, which we'll talk more about as well. But it basically said that the trooper, it's not clearly established that you cannot arrest a person based on a field sobriety test, even when you don't know how to do the field sobriety test. So they dismissed the case under that, it's like special protection for police. And so my advice to anyone whatsoever, if you're stopped by the police and they try to get you to do a field sobriety test, you shouldn't take it, because even though you're completely sober, have no drugs or alcohol in your system, and this trooper can just say he failed it because he doesn't know how to actually administer it, there's really nothing you can do about it. You're going to go to jail. You're going to get a blood test and a urine test or a drug test and alcohol test. They're going to see that you didn't have anything in your system. They're going to review the video. They're going to send it to somebody like me, and I'm going to say, yeah, this person's obviously not intoxicated. You still went to jail. It's still on your arrest record, and nothing can be done about it. And this is, this case kind of established that it's not acceptable, but it's not clearly established that you can't do that, and which is, to me, it's insane. It's not clearly established that you can't arrest innocent people because you didn't pay attention in your training. So anyway, I've arrested hundreds and hundreds of people for DWI, and I'm sad to say that if any of you are ever stopped, especially if you're elderly or getting old or and have any type of physical disability, I was strongly advised against taking a field sobriety test, because the officer that you're dealing with, you don't know the morality of that person. So if you don't know if they're a decent human being, you may end up getting arrested just so they can fill a statistic to look good with their supervisor or to fill their quota for the month. And yes, there are quotas. You don't know if you're going to be the victim of that. So it's sad to say that. And I know as a trooper, when I was arresting people for DWI, I would not want anybody else telling people that, because I needed that field sobriety test to do an adequate investigation, but I did do it properly. So Let's talk a little bit or a lot about racial bias. So I did work for the Louisiana State Police, and they went through a few colonels over the past few years. Some of them removed with the assistance of yours truly. But the current colonel is a black man, and they asked him one day if he thought there was a racial problem within the Louisiana State Police. Like if they had how they worded it. Basically, if it was some type of racist organization. He said, no, we don't have a problem with racism in the Louisiana State Police. And I don't know what he was thinking, or I had to kind of contemplate that. Why would he say that? And I guess I figured it out. He's black. Nobody told him. Okay, so Steve Thompson is a white male. They told me. Okay, so I went in and was taught very quickly and exposed to the racist organization that it was, and that it still is in certain aspects of it. So I forget if I've told you this in prior lectures, but if you were a trooper and you were black, it was okay, but you had to meet the standard of acting white. So they would these words were given to me. They would use racial slurs regularly, and so And then now we have the issue with Ronald Green, who was beat to death in North Louisiana. And they wrote a report that said one thing, and a video clearly said something else. And they had this information for years and did absolutely nothing about it until it finally was leaked by a very brave trooper who's now been fired for helping expose the corruption. A brave black trooper, by the way. Carl Cavalier. So if you get a chance to look him up in Google and give him some support with his situation, hope he wins all his lawsuits and goes back to being a trooper where he should have been rewarded for what he did. But anyway, the statistics do show that black people are stopped at a higher statistical level, arrested, searched, and so forth. That's just a statistical fact. Some of that's going to be racism, some of that's going to be locale. But as a white male who came to the Louisiana State Police, rest assured it was, I can't say for sure now because I'm not there anymore, but the evidence still supports it. It was a very racist organization where black people were targeted because they were black, Hispanics were targeted because they were Hispanic, and the only way to be an acceptable black trooper was to, in their words, was act white. You got to be as just whiter than us. Oh man, he's cool. He's whiter than I am. That was literally the standard. So anyway, the current black colonel, nobody told him that it's racist, but they definitely told the white dude. So I probably shouldn't say half the stuff that I say because it's going to end up on Fox News, but whatever. Rotten apple. I have the rotten apple explanation. Let's take George Floyd, who was videotaped murdering a man in broad daylight with impunity, like it was just, hey, it's Tuesday and I'm gonna kneel on his neck and nobody's gonna do anything about it. So you had a lot of people say, well, that's one bad cop. Well, there was 4, 5, 6 cops at that scene. So you got one bad cop murdering somebody, you got 5 or 6 of them surrounding, circling him. That's not a bad apple. That's just a bad bunch of cops. And all those officers, which I was really, really surprised, all those officers that failed to intervene have been criminally prosecuted, which is a whole new concept, which I'm really using in my lectures now, especially teaching cops, is, you got to step up if you see something like this happening, because now you have the power of the badge and your failure to act could result in you being criminally charged. So, which it should have been that way, but let's be real. It's not easy to go against your fellow police officers. It's not easy for me. I let some things go that, I probably should have reported. I definitely let some things go that I probably should have reported. For instance, I had a trooper that I was working with in New Orleans. He decides to play this drunk guy walking around trying to fight everybody. It's at the end of shift. We talked to the people that he was trying to fight. He was swinging on them. They was like, we just want him to leave us alone. We don't want to press charges. So we decided not to arrest him, but we decided we're going to take him away from the scene. Well, I put him in handcuffs because I had probable cause to arrest him, and I could have just taken him to jail as easy as giving him a ride somewhere. It would have been perfectly acceptable. But I put him in handcuffs, checked for tightness, double lock. You always got to do that. Put him in the car, and we start driving. The guy that I was with starts driving. I was working in New Orleans away from my home because after Hurricane Katrina, they had a reduction, not enough police officers. He starts telling the guy, and I really shouldn't say this on video, but he starts telling the guy, hey, we're going to let you out of these cuffs. We're going to let you go. I'm going to give you 14 seconds, and I'm going to shoot you. So you got 14 seconds to get away. And I was like, what are you doing? And so he stops the car, lets the guy out at the park. I go to take my handcuffs off, and he's really talking this guy up, and he's breathing heavy. He's like, I think the guy was convinced that the trooper that I was with was going to shoot him. And I was just like, this is stupid. So the guy will run away, and that'll be the end of it. I get one handcuff off, and now my fellow trooper is there with a handcuff dangling. I'm sorry, the suspect is with a handcuff on. He rips the handcuffs away from me and then goes to swinging on the other trooper. And I immediately yank out my taser. I'm thinking he's got handcuffs. That's a deadly weapon. He hits the other trooper. He's going to cause significant injuries. I was like, I just put my taser away, and the other trooper's screaming at me, tase him, tase him, tase him. I just told the guy, I said, I'm not tasing him. I said, I'd beat your ass too. And the fight kind of stopped at that point. And I said, hey man, this is stupid. He was joking. I was talking to the suspect at this point. He was joking. He's an asshole. Nobody's going to shoot you. We're letting you go. Let's just calm down. And the guy calmed down, but he still had his fist up. And I told him, I said, we're letting you go, but I do need my handcuffs because they were mine. They were made out of titanium. And anyway, the guy faces the other trooper that I'm with, and he backs to me with his back to me, and I could have tackled him, tased him, punched him, anything. And he reaches his hand back behind him and hands me his wrist, but wouldn't take his eyes off the other trooper. It's actually kind of funny now that I look back on him. And I took my handcuff off and said, all right, you're good. And he takes off and runs as fast as I've ever seen any man run. But I should have reported that. I didn't. I chose not to. And I told that trooper, I went one-on-one with him. I said, look, never put my freedom, my livelihood, my family, you put that all on the line because you wanted to be stupid. And I told him, I said, I should report you for this. I'm not going to, but I'm never going to ride with you again. We're done. So just tell the supervisor, me and you don't click. And that was it. And he accepted it. He apologized, and hopefully he didn't do that. I don't think he did anything like that again. I won't say his name, but several years later, that trooper was killed in the line of duty. So anyway, it's hard to report a fellow officer. But now the lack of stepping in, not just standing back and doing anything, the lack of stepping in, it can be criminally prosecuted. But my point is, when you have one bad cop doing something and then you have 4 watch it and do nothing, you don't have one bad cop, you have 5. So, the bad apple spoils the bunch, I guess is a good way to look at it, but we need people to step up and do the right thing. All right, quick touch on tasers. I've only tased one person personally, and he ripped the tasers out of his chest and threw them back at me, but that was after he threw a knife at me. So anyway, the tasers, I think it has been a good tool, statistically shown to reduce injuries, because when you go fist and elbows and knees, there's more likely to be injury. So there used to be a time when the taser was considered not a deadly weapon whatsoever, but now that has changed. You tase somebody repeatedly, it is now considered a deadly force. But won't go too much more into that. Let's touch on our theories for just a second. I hope you remember utilitarianism and formalism. So we'll talk about Dirty Harry for just a second. Dirty Harry did things kind of his own way, and it was not always legal, definitely not always legal. So, but the outcome usually was good. He was able to accomplish the objective, kill the murderer, whatever the case is. So sometimes the utility of what Dirty Harry did resulted in a good outcome versus the method which he got there, which would be illegal. And some people don't care. Let's say a man comes home and catches somebody molesting his child, And then he pulls him off the child and he punches the guy in the face and then throws him out in the front yard, checks his child out. The child's at least physically okay at that point, obviously is emotionally distraught and probably going to need all kinds of help in the future. But then now the child is in no more danger and the guy's running down the street. And this actually happened, I think, in Moss Bluff, Louisiana a few years ago. The father now grabs a friend and chases the guy down and then beats him to death. That's illegal. It's a crime. This wasn't a police officer that did this, but may as well could have been. Beats the guy to death. He dies. That's a second degree murder, 7 days a week. Probably second degree murder, 7 days a week. It went to the grand jury, no charges. Sometimes people just don't care they looked at the outcome as a dead child molester as a good thing, and the method to get there, they didn't care about that. And sometimes, that's the difference between utilitarianism and formalism. A formalist would have said, no, murder's murder, even though he's a bad guy. That's it. Use of force for the mentally ill. There's been a lot of controversy, civil lawsuits involved in this. Now, there used to be a time when a lot of people were institutionalized, the mentally ill. The USA's current largest treatment facility for the mentally ill is our jail system, and it's not an effective one. They don't get the treatment that they need, but when they become a problem, they break the law, and I've got no solution for it other than reinstitutionalization or an increase in funding for the treatment of the mentally ill, but we just don't have it. So the statistics on the amount of people who are mentally ill who end up in jail is extremely, extremely high. A lot of criminals have a psychological defect. So, keep in mind that the mentally ill, they're mentally ill and their actions could be deemed criminal, and then they end up in jail. Use of force against the mentally ill can also be an issue. So I think there was even a case where a man was being committed, which means he didn't commit a crime. He was being committed to a mental institution. The police were called to assist. And because he wouldn't follow their commands and just held on to a pole, like a parking pole or something to that effect, the police tased him over and over and over again until he died. And they said, well, sorry, but they said the use of force was okay, but actually the court system said no, he should have been treated differently. He was not suspected of committing a crime. So the level of force had to be minimum, and given that the resistance was passive or just holding onto a pole, that was too much. So there's a big increase in demand for crisis training or dealing with the mentally ill. Now, I want to make sure that we understand that when a police officer shows up at the scene, if a person is mentally ill, that's good information to find out, but they also have to control that scene. There can be a time when it's like, okay, you're suspected of committing a crime for whatever reason. I need you to comply with these verbal and lawful commands to submit to the authority, to turn around and submit to handcuffing or whatever. And if resistance to that lawful command is offered, it may be because that person's mentally ill. Well, our officers may not be able to make that determination or have the time to deal with that at the time. And sometimes we expect our police officers to be psychologists and psychiatrists and be able to recognize, immediately somebody who's suffering from psychosis, but, they're not. We give police officers rules. They must follow those rules, but, we have to put them in some constraints of reality. So, but there is training being offered out there for people, for police officers to intervene, and it's called CIT, Crisis Intervention Teams, and they're effectively able to deal with the mentally ill. But that's usually when, the only time the situation has to calm down to some point. But, the police still have a job to do. Interrogation, we'll talk just a little bit about that and more as we go along in the course. But we have a kind of a conundrum between respecting someone's rights and the police officer being able to do their job. So I train police officers to do interrogations. It's one of the fun things I do, and I do train them to be police officers to be, we'll say, some not lie, but some misleading or deceptive, and for instance, identifying with a suspect. So you can always justify a suspect's actions. It doesn't matter the crime. And you're thinking, oh yeah, you're probably right. But then I say, well, how do you justify a child rapist? How do you justify that a 50-year-old man raped a 4-year-old? And sometimes that's necessary, because sometimes, in many cases that I've worked on, the only evidence that we're going to have is going to be the confession. And so to obtain that confession, one, if I was to be honest with a suspect, I would go in and say, Mr. Smith, we've got no physical evidence whatsoever. The only way we're going to get a conviction is if you confess. And before you can, and if you do confess, you're an idiot. And I'm about to read you your Miranda rights and tell you have the right to an attorney. And the best possible thing you could do is say, I want an attorney. But that's not what we do. That's not what we train cops to do. We train cops to say, I'm here to offer you the opportunity to give your side of the story. But before I do that, I want to make sure you understand your Miranda rights. Okay, so here we go. And you read them the rights, and instead of doing what's in their best interest, which is to say, I'm not talking to you, they waive their rights and give a confession a lot of the time. And it's definitely not in their best interest. And if you talk to a lawyer who gets a client like that, it's like, when did this happen? Why didn't you call me first? And they're screaming at the client. And then they look at the video and see, how is the confession obtained? And then of course they'll try to have it excluded if they find some type of coercion or something like that. But we'll say a balance between coercion. For instance, you might say, hey, well, we talked to the girl, and it turns out that we found one of the condoms that you use with your semen in it in her room. How do you explain that? And that might be a lie. And the guy says, oh man, I thought I threw them all away. Well, that's a confession. And as long as it wasn't forced under, without Miranda, without any threats or anything like that, it should be a valid confession. So. But back to how do you sit down with a man and say, hey, it's okay that you raped that girl, which first off, you don't use rape. And I'm giving some trade secrets away, but you can justify anything. Why did you rob the bank? And they say, well, you did it because, you wanted to go buy yourself a new car and live a flashy lifestyle and buy a bunch of cocaine and become a drug dealer. Or did you do it because you're tired of watching your family starve? You did it because, you got fired from your job and you have no way to support yourself. You didn't really want to do it, but, give reasons that would justify the bad behavior. And they might say, no, I didn't do it because I wanted to go buy cocaine and become a drug dealer. Look, my kid has cancer or whatever, and he's got medical bills or whatever. So, finding a way to empathize or to justify the behavior. How do you justify rape of a 4-year-old? How did you get access to the 4-year-old? Oh, mom went to the store and left me alone with the child. What kind of mom does that? Why would did she just do that with you, or was there 7 other people that she left the child at home with? What a terrible mom. And then start placing the blame on the mom. And I'm getting sick thinking about this, having to say stuff like this, but, minimize the behavior. So, and I've seen this work in many interrogations. Just say, oh yeah, it's what you did. It could have been worse. Let's move on from it. Just tell me why you did it, and we'll go on. And like I said, you'll get a lot of confessions. Not always, but you'll definitely get some. A lot of people get confused on what entrapment is. So from an ethical perspective, I want you to understand the difference between what some people think entrapment is. I used to get accused of entrapment if I sat on an overpass where cars couldn't see me until the last second. I hit them with a radar or laser, determine their speed visually and confirm with the equipment, and go stop them and give them a ticket. Oh, that's entrapment. And entrapment is making someone commit a crime that they would not have committed otherwise. So hiding my police car to catch people that are committing the crime is not entrapment. I didn't make them commit the crime in any way. But entrapment is more like going up to somebody and saying, hey, do you, let's see, let's try to make a real world example. So medical marijuana is legal in the state of Louisiana. So let's say you got somebody who's suffering severe pain, and they go up to an undercover cop. An undercover cop goes up to this person and says, hey, would you sell me some marijuana that you get from your medical whatever? And the suspect says, no, I don't sell it. I just use it for myself. I'm not a drug dealer. He says, no, ma'am, I'm sick. I'm in really, really bad pain. I swear I'll try to go get my own later, but could you just really help me out this one last time? And my kid's got cancer, and just beg and plead and just push and push and push until the person finally says, okay, just this one time, but I'm never doing it again. This is not what I do. Well, that's kind of an officer getting someone to commit a crime that they otherwise would not have committed. So that's just, we'll say, an arguable example of that. We talked about lying in an interrogation room, telling somebody you have evidence against them that you actually don't have. And sometimes that'll get people to confess. Telling them, hey, your buddy's in the other room. He said you did it. And then he says, no, I didn't do it. He did it. I just drove the car. Boom, there's your confession. Those are acceptable lies as long as they're not deemed coercive. Now, you can't tell somebody, oh, you're gonna, if you confess, we'll just let you go with a warning. You can't do that one unless you really are gonna just let them go with a warning. So, police lying. We talked a lot about it. I'm seeing a lot of it. And the only way I can tell if somebody's lying is if I got video evidence suggesting otherwise. And I've lost track of all the videos I have and the reports that say one thing and the video says something else. In fact, I sat down with a high-ranking police official, and I said this. I brought it to his attention, and I said, "This is, look at this. This video says this, but the report says this. Those are lies." And he says, that's not really a lie. A lie is, it's not really a lie. I said, well, it's not the truth. He said, yeah, it's not the truth. Anyway, I was confused by the end of the conversation, but he wouldn't accept that a lie was a lie, and there was no accountability that was going to be handed down for this. So I don't even know how to work with that. A lie is a lie. Now, I understand you make a mistake. You put 123 Main Street when it was 321 Main Street. Okay, that's a mistake. But when you say, I have evidence against this suspect, and this is what that evidence is, and that evidence, according to the video, unequivocally does not exist, that's a lie. But sometimes there's not accountability for that. So anyway, lies can be acceptable by the police community or even by the public. If you can justify it, hey, I planted drugs on this suspect because he got away with a kidnapping and rape and a murder 5 years ago. And, I wanted to put the guy in jail, and I found a way to do it by planting evidence. Okay, the officer lied, wrote a report, but let's say he got caught on video. A lot in the community, probably even myself, would say, well, I at least understand your motivation. I don't condone the lying and framing somebody, but at least I understand your motivation. And then you have just straight up deviant lies. That's, pull somebody over, beat them up for no reason, and just write it up that, they resisted, they swung on you or whatever. So. Let's see. I think I've talked enough about lying, but I can't stress this enough. When an officer may not know that something's on video, a lot of people are secretly recording. There's a lot of dash cams out there. In fact, recently there was an officer, he pulls a guy over, gets him out of the car, runs up and just beats the crap out of him. Clear as day. The officer had no dash cam, no body cam. The suspect wasn't recording. The suspect went to jail for battery on a police officer and fighting the police officer, resisting and so forth. The guy gets out of jail and he knows that the police officer lied, but who's going to believe him? He's got a record. And we need to understand that what a bully actually is. Someone who does something like this, like it's a bully. Somebody who beats somebody up and writes a report, lies about it to justify putting them in jail, is a bully. And they don't do it to people who can fight back. If you did that to the CEO of a major organization who didn't have a blemish on his record, yeah, they're not going to mess with that guy because they know, he's got social capital and people are more likely to believe him. But if you got some guy who's been arrested 5 or 6 times, 20 times, whatever, who's going to believe him? So that's where this particular officer identified a weakness and said, I can do this to this person. I can get away with it because nobody's going to believe him. The guy gets out of jail, goes door to door in the neighborhood and catches a surveillance camera pointed right at what happened. And what was on the video and what was on the report were not the same, not even close. Blatant, bold-faced lies. suspect gets released or all charges drop, and then the officer ends up going to jail, which is, like I said, it's rare, but it does happen. So police are caught in too many lies. So if you're going to be a cop, don't lie. Pretend, just think everything's on video, and if you're not really sure what happened, only write down what you're sure of. And if you are a member of the public, then you record it. People are like, well, why are you, why is the public always wanting to record us? Well, because we honestly, we need to. And I am still a police officer. I don't work patrol. I just do aviation. I just do training. But getting access to these videos, you have to pay a lot of money for them. You may never get them. They do tend to disappear. And in fact, I've seen criminal cases dismissed because there was well, I can't talk about that case, but there was some pretty serious criminal charges dismissed because all the video evidence just disappeared. So that wraps up chapter 3. Sorry it was so long. It was a full hour. So we'll see you in chapter 4.